unconditionally. Later that afternoon, Marcus had a video call with Victoria about the Golden Hearts Foundation, which he had established 6 months earlier with $50 million from his personal fortune. The new screening process is working beautifully, Victoria reported. She had joined the foundation as legal director after leaving her law firm. We've placed 27 children in permanent homes this month alone. That's wonderful, Marcus said. What about the Turner siblings, the ones who wanted to stay together? We found them a home yesterday, Victoria smiled. A couple in Portland who specifically requested siblings. The Golden Hearts Foundation had already helped place over 200 children in loving families since its launch. The foundation focused on creating thorough screening processes for adopted families and providing ongoing support after placement. After dinner that evening, Marcus sat with the twins in the living room. This had become their special time to talk about their day and any concerns they had. I got a letter today, Marcus said carefully, from Serena's lawyer. Both girls went still, but they didn't show the fear that once accompanied any mention of Serena's name. What did it say? Maya asked. She's trying to get out of prison early, Marcus explained honestly, but the judge said no. She has to serve her full sentence. Will she try to find us when she gets out? Mia asked, her voice steady. No, Marcus assured her. The restraining order means she can never come near any of us, and she doesn't know where we live now. The twins nodded, processing this information. Over the past year, Marcus had learned to answer their questions about Serena honestly, but age-appropriately, always reinforcing that her actions reflected her flaws, not theirs. Dr. Miller says some people can't love properly, Maya said thoughtfully, referring to the school counselor. It's not the fault of the people they can't love, it's something broken inside them. Marcus nodded, impressed by her insight. That's very true. Later that night, after the twins were in bed, Marcus and Emily sat in the kitchen with cups of tea. Unlike his whirlwind romance with Serena, their relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values. The girls are doing so well, Emily said. Their resilience is remarkable. They still have moments, Marcus admitted. Last week, Maya organized all her books by size, color, and subject when she was stressed about a test. Emily nodded. That's her way of creating order when she feels anxious. But she's learning healthier coping mechanisms. Marcus reached across the table and took Emily's hand.
Preparing for work.
I couldn't have helped them heal without you. Emily squeezed her hand. You did the hard part. You believed them, protected them, and rebuilt their trust. 2 weeks later, Marcus gathered the staff of Golden Hearts Foundation for an important announcement. The conference room was filled with social workers, counselors, and administrators
I'm just a
who had
regular
joined this
person
mission.
trying to
Next
send
month,
you.
we're expanding to open offices
Oh,
in
there's
Chicago and Los Angeles. Marcus
Look on my
announced.
page. I'm not
With
nothing.
your help, we've created a model that works, and now we can reach more children. The Foundation's careful vetting process for adoptive parents had become a gold standard in the industry. Every potential family underwent extensive background checks, home visits, and psychological evaluations before being approved. At home that evening, Marcus found the twins discussing Christmas, which
Throw
was
my
just
mask
3
from
weeks away.
Halloween
Can we get a real treat
so I can
this
get some
year?
views. I'm
Mia
trying to
asked.
get
A big one that
4,000
touches the
watch
ceiling?
hours.
Of course, Marcus agreed.
It's
We can
just
go
a
to the tree
mask,
farm this
guys.
weekend to pick one out.
It's just a
And can we make
mask.
new ornaments? Maya
Just a
suggested.
mask.
I don't want to use the ones from the penthouse.
This is just like,
Marcus understood
I'm
immediately.
trying to get my 4,000
That's a
hours, guys.
wonderful idea. We'll
I'm
start
at
fresh.
300. I need
Create new
4,000.
traditions. The mention of Christmas no longer brought
It's hard out
shadows to the
here.
twins' eyes. The painful memories were fading, replaced by new
I'm
happy
okay.
ones. The following
Nothing to be
Saturday,
scared about.
the family visited a children's shelter supported by the Golden Hearts
I'm
Foundation.
just going
The twins
to
had
bring my
asked to bring
puzzle down
toys for children who wouldn't have
because,
Christmas otherwise. I
nice
remember when we
puzzle.
lived at Golden Hearts, Maya told a small boy as she helped him build with
Gotta
blocks.
keep you guys watching
It
for a
was
little
scary
bit.
sometimes, but then our dad
Trust me.
found us and gave
Go
us
to
a
my
forever
page.
home. Marcus
I'm just a
watched from
regular
across the
stay-at-home
room,
mom.
his heart full as Mia showed a little girl
Look,
how to paint a snowflake.
I'm so
Emily
hot in
stood
this
beside
thing.
him, her hand slipping naturally into his. "You've done something remarkable," she said quietly. "Not just with Maya and Mia, but with all of this." She gestured to the children around them. "The experience changed me," Marcus admitted. "Before, I thought protecting the twins meant providing financially, giving them a luxurious home. Now I understand that real protection is about being present, believing them, making sure they feel safe." As Christmas Eve approached, the brownstone was transformed. A tall pine tree stood in the corner of the living room, decorated with handmade ornaments. The twins had created a new tradition of making ornaments that represented important moments from their year. A small paintbrush for Mia's first art exhibition. A math symbol for Maya's competition victory. On Christmas Eve, the family gathered in the living room to open one gift each, just as they had done before. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different, filled with genuine joy rather than tension. Maya carefully opened her package to find a telescope. "My own telescope!" she exclaimed. "Now I can study the stars whenever I want." Mia unwrapped a professional art set with real artist paints and brushes. "This is just like the ones at school," she said, eyes wide with excitement. After hot chocolate and cookies, Marcus read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," a tradition he had insisted on keeping. The twins, now
Can you guys tell me where you guys are from?
were tucked into
Just
their
put
own beds.
in the comment section.
Marcus sat on the edge of
Where you guys
Maya's
from?
bed, smoothing her curly hair from her forehead. "Did you have a good day?" he asked.
And
Maya
again,
nodded
I'm just
sleepily.
doing a puzzle.
"The best Christmas Eve ever. Better than last year," Mia called from her door,
Guys,
where Emily was helping her
it's
hang up
just
her
to get my
robe.
hours up.
"Much better," Marcus agreed.
It's just to get my hours
As
up.
he kissed Maya goodnight,
Just done a puzzle.
she asked the question that had
Show
been on
them
her
what?
mind. "Will we ever have
Show
to
them my
meet
face?
again?"
You
Marcus
guys
met
know I was
her
on here
eyes
hours ago
steadily.
doing the
"Next,
same thing and I
this
got
is your
over 100 views.
The
Now I put the
certainty of
mask
his voice
on
made
and now I'm
Maya
getting
smile as her
all
eyes
these
drifted
comments. So
close.
that's all I'm trying to
Marcus
do.
moved to Mia's
I
room,
have to make the
where she
hours
was
work.
already climbing into bed. "Daddy?" she asked as he
My
pulled the
face?
blanket up. "Are you and Dr. Emily going to get married?"
My face is on my channel. Go look at my channel.
Was pretending not to
You will see
hear
my
as she
face. Just I'm a
straightened
regular
Mia's
person
bookshelf.
like you.
"Would that be
I'm
okay
just
with
trying
you and
to,
Maya if we did?" he asked carefully.
you know,
Mia
you need
nodded.
$4,000, right?
"She loves us for real.
So that's my way
Not
of
fake
getting out.
like Serena." "Yes, she does,"
My
Marcus
what?
agreed. "And I love her too." "We know," Mia yawned. "We've known for ages." After both girls were asleep,
What
Marcus
all
and
the stuff
Emily
you
stood in
fucking
the hallway
done?
between their rooms.
But
"Did you mean what you said to
I'm literally
Mia?"
just putting the puzzle
Emily
piece
asked
together.
softly.
Took me an
Marcus
hour
took
to
her
do the
hand.
whole edge.
"Every word. But I want to do things right this time. Slowly, with the girls' needs first." Emily nodded. "I wouldn't want it any other way." As they walked downstairs, Marcus paused to look at the family photos on the wall. Not the perfect posed portraits that had hung in the penthouse, but real moments of joy captured throughout the year. The twins laughing as they jumped into a pile of autumn leaves. Marcus and Emily helping them build a snowman. The four of them at the beach last summer. These images told the story of their healing, of the family they had become. It hadn't been an easy journey, but standing
My
there
sister
with
watched
Emily
your
beside him
videos.
and his daughters sleeping safely upstairs, Marcus
Thank
knew they
you.
had created something precious.
Thank you so
A
much.
family built on trust, honesty, and unconditional love. The home was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock and the occasional crackle from the fireplace. Outside, snow had begun to fall, covering Boston in a gentle white blanket. But inside, all was warm and secure. A sanctuary they had built
Alright, so I
together,
got the edge
where the
down on
shadows
this
of the
side.
past could no
Whew.
longer reach them. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next
Alright.
one. Don't waste
You probably wondering why these pens are
Click
here.
on the
Well,
screen.
my paper bended up, so I'm trying to keep my paper down so that the puzzle doesn't lift up. You know, that's how that goes, unfortunately. Let me move you guys a little bit so you can see what I'm doing now. So yeah, I'm literally just going down the pieces.
They say love is a beautiful thing.
I'm doing it don't do like this because the last time I glued pieces down, I messed up really bad, so I'm trying to take my time with this. Because one step, the ceiling got one shot at this.
People often remarked that they were inseparable. Their love story was like that of Romeo and Juliet, a tale of passion, dedication, and mutual respect.
I don't eat hamburger helpers.
Strong, hard-working man.
You should say lay off the rice or soda. Then I can say okay. The hamburger helper,
As the years passed,
I don't eat that.
only grew stronger. The couple
But yeah,
eagerly anticipated the
I
day
eat a lot of
when
rice,
the child
so I
would
can be
come
off the
alive.
rice.
When
Yeah, I
Naomi
could do
became
that.
pregnant, their joy was boundless. Kunli was over the moon, and every night he would talk to Naomi's growing belly, dreaming about the life they would have with their baby.
Thank
Whether
you.
it's a boy or a girl, our child will be our greatest blessing, Kunli would say with a broad
Thank you
smile.
so much, guys.
Naomi would laugh and hold his hand, her heart filled
Yeah,
with
hamburger
joy.
helper?
A few weeks later,
I did not
Naomi
eat
gave
that.
birth to a beautiful baby
And I
boy.
don't think I've even tried it
Named him
before.
David, believing
I'm such
he
a
was
picky
true
eater.
gift from the heavens.
Alright, how can I be picky and
Kunli
fat?
was overjoyed
Well,
as he held his son for the
I ate the
first
same
time,
thing over and over. I eat
marveling
chicken
at
and
his
rice,
fine
chicken and rice.
features. Naomi watched with tears of joy as Kunli whispered sweet promises of love and protection to their son. However, as the days turned into weeks, the couple began to notice something unusual about their son. He was an
Yep, today I
exceptionally
had,
quiet baby. Too
today I
quiet.
finally had pizza
Unlike
for,
other babies, he
like, I
never
don't even like
cries or
pizza,
makes
but
any
I said,
sounds
let
at
me get
all.
a thin pizza then.
At first, they
I
thought he
still
was
got it in
simply
the
a
fridge,
calm and contented child.
but I don't want it. I
But
just
as
want
time
chicken and
passed,
rice.
the truth became clear. David was mute.
That's all I would eat,
Kunli's initial
to be
joy
honest
gave
with
way
you.
to
Or
frustration
chicken
and
tenders.
confusion. He couldn't understand why their child, who seemed so
Let me
perfect,
get this out
couldn't
the
speak.
way.
As the
Listen to my
reality of
flow.
their son's condition sank in,
Let me move this out the
frustration
way.
grew into anger, and he began to search for someone to blame.
So,
Unfortunately, he directed his anger at Naomi.
I don't want to mess it
This
up
is
too
your
much.
fault, Kunli would shout, his voice filled with
Don't do
anger.
that.
I am sure he inherited this disease from your family side.
Okay.
Naomi's heart broke
Starting
each
to
time
bend
he
up.
blamed her, but she remained silent, hoping that Kunli's anger would pass and that he would eventually accept their son for who he was. But Kunli's hatred only deepened over time. He could not reconcile with the idea of their son being mute right from birth, and in his eyes, Naomi
See how
was
it's
the cause
sliding?
of this misfortune. The once warm and loving home they had built together became a place of tension and sorrow. As David grew into a handsome and gentle child, his silence was a constant reminder of Kunli's disappointment and rage. When David turned 7, Kunli and Naomi tried desperately to have another child, hoping that a second baby might bring some joy back into their lives. But despite their efforts, Naomi was unable to conceive again. This failure only fueled Kunli's resentment further. From a loving husband, Kunli began to withdraw from Naomi, his love for her now twisted into hatred. One fateful evening, Kunli got back home drunk and full of rage. He made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. He stood before Naomi, his eyes cold. Get out of my house, he said, his voice without any emotion. You and your cursed child have brought nothing but misery into my life. Pack your things and leave my house. This thing can never be my blood. I can't be called the father of someone that will never amount to anything in life. Naomi was stunned, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. She had nowhere to go, no family or friends to turn to. She fell to her knees before him, begging, "My husband, I have no place to go. Do you remember how we started? It is God who gives children. Please, don't do this to us." But Kunli's words left no room for argument. With tears streaming down her face, Naomi packed a few belongings and took David by the hand. As they stepped out of the home they had once filled with love and peace, Naomi's heart ached for the life they had lost and for the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Naomi and David wandered the streets, unsure of where to go. The night was cold and the streets were nearly empty. Her thoughts raced as she tried to figure out how they would survive. She had no money, no family to depend on, and now no home. Her only concern was for her son, who clung to her hand, his innocent eyes looking up at her with trust and love. After hours of walking, Naomi came across an old abandoned primary school building on the outskirts of town. It had no doors or windows, but it offered some shelter for them. She decided they would stay there for the night. She found a corner where the roof was not broken and laid a small mat using her small wrapper to keep them warm. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, as Naomi and her son made the abandoned school building their home. Naomi did her best to provide for David, taking on odd jobs whenever she could find them, but work was scarce and money even scarcer. They lived on the bare minimum, sometimes going to bed hungry for days. Despite the hardship, Naomi remained determined to keep her son safe and cared for. She never allowed him to see her despair, always putting up a smile and reassuring him that everything would be okay soon. David would often sit outside by the step, his eyes filled with expectation, hoping to see his father walk through the gate. But each passing day, he was left with nothing but disappointment. As the days went by, he adapted to their new life. Though he couldn't speak, he communicated through gestures and expressions, and his bright eyes never faded. Naomi found strength in his unwavering positivity, even as they faced daily challenges that would break most people. The bond between mother and son grew stronger with each passing day as they struggled together to survive. 9 years passed already. David had learned to navigate the world without words, his actions and gestures speaking volumes to those who took the time to understand him. Despite the harshness of their life, David's spirit remained unbroken, and he became a source of support to his mother. But as time went on, the town around them began to change. The old abandoned school building that was once forgotten became the focus of new construction plans. One morning, some federal government officials arrived at the building with a team of workers ready to demolish the building to build a public hospital. Naomi pleaded with them to let her pack their small belongings, but it was too late. Right before her eyes, the entire building was demolished. Once again, they were left stranded with no place to go. Naomi's mind raced with fear and uncertainty. Out of desperation, she reached out to one of her old friends, Monica. They were best of friends back in secondary school, but after they got married, life took a different turn for them. Monica, who was married to a wealthy politician, lived in the nearby city. With no other options, Naomi decided they would travel there, hoping that her friend would take them in. The journey was long and difficult, but they pressed on, driven by the hope that they might find refuge with her friend. When they finally arrived in the city, Naomi's heart was filled with both hope and fear. She found a public phone and dialed the number she had written in her diary so many years ago. The phone rang and rang, but no one answered. She tried again and again, but still there was no response. Naomi's hope began to fade, but she refused to give up. They waited near the phone for hours and continued dialing the number, but each time she was met with silence. Finally, as night fell, Naomi realized the bitter truth. Her friend was not going to answer. She and her son were stranded alone in a strange city with nowhere to go. She stood by the public phone, the receiver still in her hand, as the reality of their situation sank in. Her friend, the one person she had hoped would help them, was not answering her calls. She was left with no plan, no place to stay, and a deep sense of despair that she fought to keep hidden from David. The streets of the city were unfamiliar and intimidating, especially as night began to fall. Naomi and her son walked aimlessly, hoping to find some place where they could rest their backs. The city was bustling with activity, but it felt cold and unwelcoming to them. They passed by brightly lit shops and restaurants, the sounds of laughter and conversation filling the streets. They stood by the bus stop, Naomi's heart filled with heaviness at the thought of the warmth and comfort that seemed so close, yet so unreachable. As they walked along the street, her mind raced, trying to think of what to do next. She knew they couldn't spend the night on the streets, it was too dangerous. But every door they knocked on remained closed, and every plea for help was met with indifference. The people of the city were too busy with their own lives to care about the predicament of a homeless woman and her mute son. Finally, after hours of walking, Naomi spotted an uncompleted building on the outskirts of the city. It was dark and empty, almost like the abandoned school they had lived in before. It wasn't much, but it would at least provide some shelter.
Let's go down again.
As they
That is
stepped
good,
into the building,
good.
her heart heavy with fear, she whispered to herself, "At least we found a corner where we can rest our head and be shielded from the rain." Naomi laid down the only blanket she managed to grab before the building was demolished. As they settled in, David looked at his mother with questioning eyes, sensing the worry aching across her face. She forced a smile, reaching out to his hands. "Don't worry, everything will be okay," she whispered, though the voice sounded shaky. "We just need to rest here only for tonight. Tomorrow we'll call Auntie Monica again," she said. David, ever trusting, nodded and rested his head beside his mother. Naomi watched as her son's eyes fluttered closed, his breathing slowed as he drifted into sleep. But she couldn't sleep, as the thoughts of what the future held for them consumed her heart. The city was completely different from what they were used to. She knew that it was almost impossible to live in such a city without a home or money to survive. As the hours ticked by, the reality of their situation weighed heavily on her soul. She thought about Kunle and the life they had once shared. The love that had once been so strong had turned into resentment and bitterness. Naomi had accepted her fate long ago, but she had never stopped hoping for a better life for David. Now it seemed that hope was slipping away, replaced by the cold, hard truth that they were utterly alone, and their only source of hope is in God, believing that one day their story will change. Few years passed since they moved into the new city. David grew into a handsome, hard-working young man. He still couldn't speak a single word, not a cry of anger, not a shout of joy, but everyone around him could feel the kindness that lived inside him. While others spoke with their mouths, David spoke with his heart. Although life has not become easy for them, they still managed to survive in the same uncompleted building, one room with cracked walls and a leaking roof. Naomi was no longer the strong woman she used to be. Years of struggle had weakened her bones and drained her strength. There were days she could barely lift a bucket of water. David became the man of the house. Every morning before the sun rose, he would walk to a small local restaurant down the street. He swept the floors, washed the plates, and cleaned the tables. He worked harder than anyone else, even though he earned the least because of his disability. Still, he never complained, not once. When the customers smiled at him, he bowed politely. When they tried to talk to him, he replied with a gentle grin and a nod. Customers loved him. Naomi also tried to support in the little way she could. She began frying a kara by the roadside junction. Some days she sold plenty and came home with a smile. But no matter how hard the day was, they kept pushing and doing what was right before God. Some nights Naomi would stay up, her heart heavy with worries that caused her sleepless nights. David would often sit beside her to console her. He would touch her shoulder gently, assuring her through his eyes. "Mom, we will be okay," he said using sign language. Even without a voice, David's love for his mother spoke louder than words. One fateful day, there was a woman named Madame Agnes. She had no children, but she was once married to her high school sweetheart, who died of cancer just 9 months after their wedding. Ever since then, she remained single. The memories of her husband were too hard for her to let go. Though Madame Agnes was very wealthy and popular in the city, she owned many properties and businesses, and her influence was well known. She lived a very simple life. One day, as she was coming back from a meeting, her car broke down as a result of overheating. She stepped out of the car with confusion written all over her face. As she stood looking for help, she saw a small local restaurant by the corner. She entered the restaurant panicking. That was when she saw a young man enter quietly, going from table to table with a rag, cleaning and clearing the dirty plates customers had used. It was David. As he turned, he saw Madame Agnes standing by the door. Her expression said a lot. He walked up to her with concern in his eyes. Though he could not speak, his gestures spoke for him. Madame Agnes gently explained, pointing outside. "My car broke down. Can you help me?" she asked, using gestures so he could understand. David nodded quickly, eager to help. He followed her to where her car sat helplessly by the roadside, steam rising from the bonnet like smoke from a dying fire. Without saying a word, he quickly lifted the bonnet. His hands moved with surprising confidence. Without thinking of the hot steam burning his hands, he rushed back into the restaurant, grabbed a bucket of water, and poured some into the radiator to cool it. Madame Agnes stood speechless, wondering how a poor cleaner could be so skilled with cars, even more than her personal mechanic. Minutes later, the engine suddenly roared back to life. Madame Agnes gasped in relief. "Young man, thank you,"
she said, truly touched by his kind heart and humility. David simply bowed his head, feeling shy. Madame Agnes watched him closely, moved by his kind heart. Then she said, "What is your name?
Alright.
And where are you from?"
I'm
But
almost
David
finished with
could
this
only
part.
gesture, unable to explain his situation with words. He pointed down the street, indicating where he lived. But before Madame Agnes could say another word,
Now
one
this
of
part
David's colleagues at the restaurant
is going
rushed
to
toward
be
them with speed. He
real
called David
tricky.
urgently, waving his hands as if
Because
trouble was brewing inside. David bowed
just
politely
is.
to Madame Agnes and hurried back to the restaurant. She watched him leave, and for a moment, her heart skipped. There was something in his eyes, a deep sadness hidden behind a quiet smile. He looked like someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, yet still choosing to smile. When David reached the restaurant, his arrogant boss, Over Douglas, was waiting by the entrance, his arms crossed and his face twisted with anger. "Superman," he clapped mockingly as David arrived. "Well done. I see
These
you now have a
things
new
are
job,
always tricky.
saving broken cars on the streets.
This is all I'm doing
Go
like
and
this.
continue your heroic mission, because you are fired," he shouted, his voice cold and harsh.
Oh,
David dropped to his knees
I
in
done
tears,
messed it up,
trying to
y'all.
explain with his hands, trying to show that he only
I
left
done
to help a
messed it
stranger
up.
in need. But Over Douglas gave him no chance,
Oh,
no mercy, and threw him into the street. As David walked home, his feet dragged heavily against the ground. His heart felt broken. How would he explain to his mother that he had just lost the only job helping them survive? A job that took him months to find. Tears streamed down his face as he imagined his mother's disappointment. Who will hire a boy who cannot speak in this hard economy where people
see, I done
even
messed
without
up
a
again.
disability still find it difficult to survive? He wondered painfully. When he finally got home, he used gestures to explain everything to his mother. How he helped a stranded woman on the street to fix her car, and because of that, he was fired. His mother held his hands gently. "My son," she said softly, "when you do good, heaven sees it. God will make a way for us, even if the world shuts its doors." David tried to smile, but his heart was still breaking inside. Days
and it happened
passed,
that
but
fast.
Madame Agnes could not forget the young
That
man
is
who had helped
crazy.
her. His gentle eyes, his kindness, his humility. Most people would ask for money before lifting a finger, but he helped her without expecting anything.
You see how quick
That
I messed
kindness
it up?
burned in her heart. One morning,
That's what I
she
said.
drove to the small local restaurant hoping to
Doing
see him.
puzzles is so
But when she
tricky.
arrived, she met Martin, the same colleague who came to call David that day. "Where
And
is
if
the
you
young
ever
man who
try
helped
to
me?" she asked.
pick it up,
Martins lowered his voice sadly.
what to do
"His
now,
name is David.
it's a
He
wrap.
doesn't work here anymore. He was
Mhm.
fired that day. He went outside to help you."
It's just
Madame
a wrap.
Agnes felt sad hearing that. She was the reason David had lost his job.
Everything was perfect
Did?
until that
She
end.
asked urgently. Martins hesitated
I
at
know what to
first,
do.
then finally answered yes. "He lives at the
I'm
outskirts
just
of
gonna have a
town.
piece that's just
Please, can you take me
on the
there?"
side.
Madame Agnes pleaded,
So-
her voice full of worry and guilt.
It's time
Martins
to
looked into her eyes and saw sincere concern. "Yes, Ma, but only after closing hours," he said. "Thank you. Thank you so much," she said, relief washing over her. Madame Agnes returned to her car and waited. Hours passed until finally Martins finished work and joined her. They drove through the busy streets of the city until they reached a rundown, uncompleted building.
So this is where it
It was
gets
clear
tricky.
that this was where David lived.
So now that you have all your bottoms down,
It was cold, dark, and unsafe. A place
it's
no one
time.
ever called home. As David opened the door, he was shocked to see Martins and Madame Agnes.
It's time to get the color coded. So back again, we're doing this, right? So I'm gonna focus on this side first because this is the darkest purple. I don't think that purple is anywhere else. Like I can predict that most of that purple is over here, so I'm gonna go on that side. So I'm gonna, this is how I do it. I literally go through each piece and try to like find that one color coordinated. That's how I get this part. This could be hard. Okay. So like, see this? Like that. I would do like this and over there. It might be up here, but I'm just doing dark purple first. Like that. And I'm literally just
She thanked Madame
Okay,
Agnes
the zebra.
repeatedly, tears of relief.
I know zebras down
filling her
here,
eyes.
right?
David too smiled brightly,
So
his silent way of
I
expressing
try
the
to
deep gratitude he felt.
see.
As days
I found
passed,
zebra already.
David and his mother settled into their new
You got to
home.
find.
The apartment
So
was
zebra,
comfortable,
giraffe.
a safe
I
haven
focus
after
on
years of
zebra,
hardship.
giraffe,
They could finally
and
breathe easy,
that dark
no longer
purple
worried
stuff.
about where they would sleep or find
And
the
that's
next
how I
meal.
do it.
One day, Madame Agnes called David's mother with a request. Mama, she began gently, I've
Who
heard
was
that David
this?
is very talented with cars.
That's a dark
My
purple,
driver
huh?
has just resigned because
Going
he
over
is
there.
relocating abroad with his family.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if David could help me by working as my driver.
I think that's
Naomi
over there.
hesitated for a moment, thinking of her
It's
son's
a
disability
maybe.
and the responsibilities it would bring. But she remembered how much David
Mm-hmm.
loved cars and how good it
That's
would be
over
for him
there.
to have something meaningful to do after losing his
Oh my
job.
God! I started up on the
She
floor.
also couldn't ignore the kindness Madame Agnes had shown them. Of course, Madame Agnes, Naomi replied softly. David would be
That's a
happy to
dark
help you,
purple.
but please, you don't have to pay him.
Dark purple.
You've already done so much for us.
Who is this?
Madame Agnes chuckled warmly.
This, oh, this might be
David's work
this
deserves
might be
fair payment.
Simba.
It's important for
The
him to know the value of his
circle
skills.
of
I insist on paying him a
life.
salary every month. Naomi, touched by her generosity, agreed. From that day on, David began working for Madame Agnes. Though he couldn't speak, his actions spoke volumes.
Okay.
He moved
Let's
with
say,
confidence behind the
let's
wheel,
see
his
here.
love for cars evident in
Let's
how
say.
smoothly and carefully he drove. Madame Agnes quickly grew fond of him. His quiet determination and the joy
He
she
over
found
here.
in his
See the
presence
birds over
brought
here.
a new light into her life. For David and his mother,
That's
life
the
had taken an
field.
unexpected turn.
Let me look and
The
see
hardships of the past were slowly
who is
fading
who.
away, replaced by a
That's a
future
zebra.
filled with hope and
That's a
security.
zebra.
One Saturday
He
morning,
down here
Madame
somewhere.
Agnes sat in her living room,
That
going
look like
through some
Simba
documents
to
that had
me.
been delivered to her by her manager for signing. She enjoyed the calmness that had filled her life ever since she met David and his mother. Her life had taken a different turn, and the loneliness she once felt had disappeared. She appreciated the warmth and joy they brought into her life, but this peace would soon be disrupted.
That's
Her sister
Timon.
Sandra, whom
Yep,
Madame
that's my
Agnes had
friend.
supported many times
That's my
in the
friend
past,
Timon and
her life
Puma.
unbalanced. Sandra was a woman who had wasted every chance given to her, squandering the money and every opportunity Madame Agnes had provided over the years.
Where they at?
Each time she returned with a new excuse.
Oh, they down
asking
there.
for more.
Okay, the evil's
As
down
soon
there
as
too.
Sandra heard rumors
So
that
now I
Madame
know the
Agnes
evils
was
are down
helping a
there.
woman and
Then
her son, her heart burned
I'm
jealousy
gonna get
and
them
rage.
too.
That morning, she stormed into the house, her face twisted with anger. She
That's the
couldn't believe
birdie.
that Madame Agnes would offer assistance to
I guess
strangers
there's a little
while
bit of
refusing
sky.
to support her own flesh
Who
and
is
blood.
this?
Her frustration spilled out as she
He
confronted
green.
her
Oh, he
sister,
over there.
demanding to know why Madame Agnes had chosen to help others instead of her. Madame Agnes, who had been calm and composed, felt anger rising. Years of disappointment with Sandra's irresponsibility came rushing to the surface. She had spent countless sums of money helping Sandra from one failed business to another, yet nothing ever changed. She was still paying for Sandra's children's school fees every session. The claim that she owed her anything cut deep. Madame Agnes's anger burst forth as she confronted Sandra, reminding her of all the support she had provided over the years. Despite everything,
I think it's
Sandra
that
had
tree over
thrown
in the
away
corner,
every
to be
single
honest.
opportunity.
I'm
Madame
gonna just
Agnes's
take him
voice was
out.
filled with frustration
Here
as she
goes
made it
zebra.
clear to
Here go
Sandra
animals.
that she had no right to demand anything more. She had done more than enough, despite her lies. Sandra, stunned by the force of her sister's words, stood speechless. The truth of her failures pricked her heart,
It's the
but
truth.
pride would not let her admit
The
she was wrong.
circle
Instead, she
of
stormed out of the house
life.
in a fit of anger, slamming the door behind her. As Madame Agnes sat alone in her living room,
Yeah, when
she
working
knew
with
she had
this, you
done
got
the
to be
right thing.
precise
Yet a
because
sense of unease
you will be
lit up.
lost.
The confrontation had been
You're
necessary,
lost.
but it was obvious that it had stirred hatred and resentment in her sister. One evening, David returned home after running errands for Madame Agnes. He had become a familiar face at the office, loved for his gentle nature, despite his inability to speak. As he made his way back to Madame Agnes's house, the moment he stepped inside, something felt wrong. The usual warmth had been replaced by a chilling silence. With his heart pounding, David moved through the house, searching for Madame Agnes. When he entered the living room, he froze. Madame Agnes lay motionless on the floor. The documents he was holding fell from his hands. David rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he tried to wake her. Panic gripped him as he realized something was terribly wrong. He lifted her arm, but it dropped lifelessly. The truth hit him like a strike of thunder. Madame Agnes was gone. Grief and terror overwhelmed David, and his silent scream filled the empty room. The woman who had shown him and his mother so much kindness, who had taken him in like a son, was no more. He felt paralyzed, unable to process the reality of her sudden death. The sound of sirens filled the air, and the front door burst open as police officers stormed into the house. David, still in shock, was quickly pulled away from Madame Agnes's body. His mind couldn't grasp what was happening, and he suddenly found
in
himself
the crowd. Oh,
labeled as the prime
there goes
suspect
Simba.
in her death. As he was dragged out of the house, David's heart was heavy with dread.
Y'all
He hadn't
see
done anything wrong.
what you gotta
Now he
do?
was being blamed for the death of the
Getting a
one person
pussy.
who had ever truly cared about him in his
What I
life.
do?
When Naomi heard the terrible news of Madame Agnes's death and her son David's arrest, her world fell apart. The woman who had shown them so much kindness was gone, and now her son was being accused of her murder. Naomi felt a deep, crushing sorrow. She rushed to the police station, desperate to see David and find out what had happened. But when she arrived, the officers refused to let her see her son. Naomi pleaded with them, her voice breaking with despair, but it was no use.
Yeah.
They turned her away, leaving her to walk home alone, her heart heavy with grief. Tears streamed down her face as she realized the full weight of their situation. She had no money to hire a good lawyer to defend her son, no one to turn to for help. Naomi felt utterly helpless, trapped in a nightmare from which she could not wake. Meanwhile, at the police station, David was suffering. The officers, convinced of his guilt, treated him harshly, and he was unable to speak or defend himself. They threw questions at him in rapid succession, demanding to know why he had been at Madame Agnes's house, who had access to her home, and what his relationship with her had really been. David shook his head, stammering, trying to explain that he loved Madame Agnes like a mother, that he would never harm her. But the officers ignored his words, interpreting his fear and silence as guilt. They accused him of lying, pushed him to confess, and threatened him with charges he didn't understand. At one point, an officer slammed his hand on the table, making David flinch, and demanded again, "Did you do this or not?" David shook his head violently, tears streaming down his face, trying to convey his innocence without speaking. Every denial seemed to anger the officers further, and their tone grew harsher. They continued to interrogate him late into the night, making him repeat every detail of his day, scrutinizing every gesture, every pause, every expression, as if they could find guilt in the way he blinked or the way his hands shook. The situation grew even more hopeless when it was discovered that the CCTV cameras in Madame Agnes's house had been disconnected the day before her death. This meant there was no footage to prove what had really happened. Without evidence to support his innocence, and with Sandra fueling suspicion against him, his situation seemed increasingly dire. Back at the empty apartment that Madame Agnes had given them, Naomi sat on the floor and cried until she had no tears left. She didn't know how to help her son, how to clear his name, or how to bring justice to the woman who saved them from a life of misery and poverty. Naomi was lost, drowning in sorrow and fear, with no idea what to do next. Days passed in agony for both mother and son. Naomi kept trying to visit David, but each time she was turned away. She prayed for a miracle, for someone to step in and help them. But as the days dragged on, it felt like that miracle would never come. The weight of their misfortune pressed down on them, leaving them trapped in a world of darkness with no clear path.
Somebody take this,
One
please.
morning, Sandra came
So I can pretty much
her
say,
face lifted in a mask of false concern. She knocked on the door, and Naomi opened it. She stepped inside, pretending to care about
yeah,
what had
so
happened. Naomi's eyes were red and swollen from days of crying, and she looked
like
exhausted,
this.
her spirit broken by the weight of
There's
everything that
something
had happened.
zebra.
Sandra sat down and spoke to her softly, acting like she was on her side.
Yeah.
She told Naomi that she wanted to help David.
Some zebra over
She
here.
said that if David agreed to confess to the killing of her sister, Madame Agnes, he might receive a lighter sentence. Sandra explained that this was the only way to save her son from a long, harsh punishment.
Over here, so
She told Naomi that this was her last hope, that there was no other way. Naomi, desperate and scared, clung to Sandra's words as if they were a lifeline. She was willing to believe anything that might save her son from more pain. Naomi had no one else to turn to, and Sandra's offer seemed like a ray of hope in a world that had
Oh,
become
it might be
dark.
another zebra.
With
It's
tears
another
in her
zebra
eyes,
child.
she thanked
They ain't the
Sandra,
same
her
zebra.
heart aching with
This
gratitude, thinking that she was
this
genuinely
zebra's
trying
over
to
here.
help.
I
When
know it.
Naomi was finally allowed to see David,
Yeah,
she
he's
hurried to the
silent.
police station,
Yeah,
her
it is.
heart heavy with fear and
Okay.
hope as she walked into the room
So
where David was being held. Her heart broke at the sight of
I
her
already
son.
found my
David
friend.
looked so lean from
Yeah.
days of not
I
eating.
found him.
His eyes
And I
were
found
red from crying,
Timon.
and his body trembled with exhaustion and fear. The sight
Oh,
was
y'all want to
almost
see?
too much for Naomi to bear,
Yeah.
but she forced herself to stay strong. She believed she had found a way to help David, and that gave her the strength to push aside her own pain. Naomi sat beside David and gently took his hand.
How do I take these
She told
comments
him
off?
about Sandra's offer, explaining that if he confessed to the crime, he might get a lighter sentence.
Okay.
Naomi's voice was filled with desperate hope, clinging
Gotcha.
to the idea that this
Alright.
could be the way to save her son
And see
from
if
more
you's gonna
suffering.
die, got to
But David's
do
reaction
some
was not what
straight.
Naomi expected. David shook his head intensely, his eyes wide with disbelief and sorrow. He pulled his hands away from his mother's grasp, his heart pounding with pain and anger. David knew he was innocent. He had loved Madame Agnes like a mother, and the thought of confessing to something he hadn't done felt like a betrayal. He couldn't understand how his own mother could ask him to lie about something so serious. Naomi couldn't understand David's refusal. In her mind, this was the only way to protect him, the only way to keep him safe.
Oh.
She grew frustrated,
Can you go
her
ahead and
voice
hear these
rising
two?
as she tried to convince David to agree. But David remained firm, refusing to admit to something he hadn't done, even if it meant facing more pain. As Naomi's frustration turned into anger, she lashed out, saying things she would later regret. You dumb and senseless boy. Look at the mess you put yourself in. Why not just confess? What will it cost you? But instead, you're allowing your useless ego to get the best of you. Since you're enjoying prison life, enjoy it. Those words cut deep, stabbing at the core of his heart. He felt shattered as he heard the cruel words from the one person he thought would always stand by him. Tears rolled down his eyes as he stood in silence. Words could never express how he felt hearing his mother say
It's
those
too hot
things
for all
to him.
that shit.
He felt utterly
It's too
alone,
hot.
trapped in a world
Okay.
where no one could hear him, where no one could
Okay.
understand his pain. The next morning, Sandra showed up with some men to the house Madame Agnes had given them. She could not continue
I'm trying
pretending
to
to
take
care
that
anymore.
off.
She claimed that without Madame Agnes around, the apartment was no longer hers to live in. Naomi was stunned, unable to believe what was happening, but with no choice, she gathered her few belongings and left the place that had been a safe haven for them. She found herself once again homeless, wandering the streets until she found an empty shop to stay in. The weight of everything was too much for her to bear. She was tired of life, of the endless suffering and heartbreak. She cried constantly, feeling abandoned and hopeless. The dreams she had once held for a better life were now completely shattered. She had lost her home, her son was in jail, and the person who had been like a guardian to them was gone. The day of the court trial arrived, and the atmosphere was heavy with tension and uncertainty. David, who had been through so much already, stood before the judge and jury, unable to speak to defend himself. His heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't express. The silence that filled the courtroom felt like a prison in itself, suffocating and inescapable. The prosecution laid out their case against David with a ruthless efficiency that made Naomi's heart break even more. They emphasized that Madame Agnes had been strangled to death in her sleep, and pointed out that David, as her driver, had been one of the last people to be with her. With no voice to explain himself, and no strong lawyer to argue his case, David's fate seemed all but sealed. The court-appointed lawyer had tried his best, but he lacked the experience and determination needed to stand up to the prosecution. The lawyer could not make the judge and jury see David for who he truly was, an innocent man who had been caught in a web of lies and deceit. As the trial continued, it became clear that David's silence was being used against him. The jury saw it as an admission of guilt, not understanding the depth of his pain and frustration. When the judge finally delivered the verdict, the words struck like a hammer, shattering any last glimmer of hope. David was sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom buzzed with whispers and murmurs, but all David could hear was the sound of his own heart breaking. His mother, who had been too overwhelmed to attend the trial, received the news later that day. When she heard the verdict, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under her. The one person she had left in the world, the child she had carried, nurtured and loved with all her heart, was now gone. Naomi couldn't believe the cruelty of the justice system. Her mind filled with rage and despair as she cried out to God, begging for mercy, for a miracle that would save her son from this unjust fate. Her anger grew against the world, at the system, at Sandra, and even at herself consumed her. She felt betrayed by everyone, even by God. How could this be happening? How could her only child be locked away to rot in prison for life for something he didn't do? The pain was unbearable. Naomi's tears flowed endlessly as she prayed and pleaded for some kind of divine intervention that never seemed to come. Meanwhile, Sandra, the woman who had been the mastermind all along, was reveling in what she thought was her victory. When she heard that David had been sentenced to life imprisonment, she felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. To her, it meant that the path was now clear for her to claim her sister's wealth. Sandra's greed had grown to monstrous proportions, and all she could think about was getting her hands on the riches she believed should have been hers. Eager to secure her place as the heir to her late sister's empire, Sandra went straight to Madame Agnes's lawyer. She arrived at the lawyer's office with a smug smile, confident that she was about to inherit a vast fortune. However, the lawyer's expression was unreadable as he pulled out Madame Agnes's will. Sandra's heart raced with anticipation as the lawyer began to read, but as the words filled the room, Sandra's smile faded, replaced by shock and disbelief. Madame Agnes had willed the majority of her properties to an orphanage, a final act of generosity that left Sandra's dreams of wealth in ruins. All Madame Agnes's mansions and company had been left to David, a gift of love and care for him. However, with David in jail, the lawyer explained that he couldn't transfer the properties to him. Instead, he planned to donate them to the less privileged, in keeping with Madame Agnes's wishes. Sandra's face turned bright red with anger, her mind spinning from the shock. Everything she had planned for, everything she wanted to gain, was slipping away. The lawyer noticed Sandra's frustration and asked why she was so interested in her late sister's property. Sandra, too angry to think straight, muttered something unclear and stormed out of the office. Outside, Sandra's mind was filled with rage and bitterness. All her hopes and dreams of wealth and power had been crushed in a single moment. The anger in her heart grew stronger as she realized that she had lost everything after all her plans, and there was nothing she could do. Her sister's will was final, and no amount of anger or plotting could change that. As Sandra walked away from the lawyer's office, she felt a deep emptiness settle in her chest. She had sacrificed everything. Her only sister, her only family left in the world, in her pursuit of wealth, and now she had nothing to show for it. One afternoon, Naomi sat quietly by an abandoned shop corner which she had made her new home, lost in thought. Her life had been filled with pain and suffering since the day her husband had thrown them out of their home. The past few months had been especially hard. Her son David was in prison, sentenced to life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. She had spent countless nights crying out to God, questioning why such cruel things had happened to them. She felt like there was nothing left for her in this world. Suddenly, her phone rang, breaking the silence. She hesitated for a moment, then reached into her bag and answered. To her surprise, it was Sandra's best friend Judith, whom she had once seen at Madame Agnes's birthday party. This was unexpected. Judith and Sandra had stopped talking just after Madame Agnes's death, and Judith had moved to Italy with her husband and children. Naomi's heart began to race as she wondered why this woman was calling her now, after all this time. As she listened, Judith spoke quickly, her voice filled with urgency. She told Naomi that she had overheard a disturbing conversation between Sandra and someone else on the phone just before she left Nigeria. Sandra had been bragging about how she had poisoned her sister, then dragged her body downstairs to make it look like she was strangled to death, and also admitted to how she had disconnected the CCTV cameras at her sister's house the day before she died out of jealousy and greed. The weight of that confession had been too much for Judith to bear, and it was the reason she had stopped being friends with Sandra. David's mother was stunned. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Sandra had been responsible for Madame Agnes's death all along. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Sandra's sudden interest in Madame Agnes's property, her insistence that David confessed to the crime, and the way she had forced him out of the house Madame Agnes had given them. It had all been part of her twisted plan. Judith continued explaining that she hadn't come forward sooner because she had been terrified for her life and the lives of her children while they were still in Nigeria. Now that they were safe in Italy,
Where's the other
she
flash
could
in
speak
this?
out without fear. Naomi's
It's
hands
right
trembled as she
here.
listened,
No, the other one, there was
realizing this
two.
could be the key to
In the
saving her
microwave.
son. Without wasting another second, Naomi thanked Judith and hung up. She immediately rushed to the police station, her heart pounding with hope and fear. She played the recording of the phone conversation for the officers, who listened intently. The
What's
evidence
this
was
for
clear.
me?
Sandra was
What's this
responsible
for
for
me?
her sister's death, and
What?
David had been
What's
wrongly
for me?
accused. The police wasted
Let
no
me see.
time in arresting
Just
Sandra.
rub into that plate?
That's the
During the
pieces for me.
interrogation,
Is that your
faced with
pizza?
the
Yes.
overwhelming
But that was
evidence
Gamma's
against
pizza.
her,
Yours is in.
Sandra
It's,
finally broke
I
down
don't know if
and confessed to
yours should be in the
everything.
microwave. If not,
She
you can
admitted that she had killed her sister out
get
of
some out of
jealousy
Nana's
and
room.
resentment. She couldn't stand the thought of her sister's success while she herself had failed in life. Her confession was bitter and filled with regret, but it couldn't undo the damage she had caused. News of Sandra's arrest and confession spread quickly. The court overturned David's conviction, and he was released from prison just days before his scheduled execution. When he walked out of the prison gates, his mother was standing outside, waiting with tears of joy streaming down her face. As they embraced tightly, both crying tears of joy, they were unable to believe that this nightmare was finally over. Naomi pleaded with her son to forgive her, she said. Days later, Madame Agnes's lawyer met with David and handed him the documents for the mansion and the company that Madame Agnes had left to him in her will. As David took the papers, something miraculous happened. He whispered, "Thank you, Lord." The lawyer stared at him in shock. This was the young man who had been mute his entire life. How could he suddenly speak? David was stunned. The words had come out of his mouth without him even realizing it. He rushed home to share the incredible news with his mother. When he reached the spot where they lived, he called out to his mother. Naomi froze. Hearing a voice calling mother, she could not believe it. All her life, she had never heard the voice of her son. As she turned in disbelief, she saw David standing there, speaking words she had never thought she would hear. They both cried and laughed, overcome with joy and gratitude. They
It's in the
danced
room.
around, praising God for
It's
the
in the
miracle
closet,
that had
baby.
transformed their lives. 4 years had passed since Madame Agnes passed away. David went on to complete his education, graduating with top honors. He took over the management of the company that Madame Agnes had left him and quickly proved himself to be a talented and compassionate leader. The company flourished under his guidance, and he made sure to give back to the community, just as Madame Agnes had taught him. They moved into the grand mansion that Madame Agnes had willed to him. Things had changed beyond the life at the uncompleted buildings where they had once struggled to survive. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it had been replaced by a new sense of purpose and hope. Naomi often reflected on the journey they had taken, from being abandoned and living in poverty, to finding kindness in the most unexpected places, and finally receiving the justice they deserved. David never forgot the lessons he had learned through their hardships. They lived peacefully, their lives now filled with joy, gratitude, and the memory of the woman who had once saved them from despair. Madame Agnes's legacy lived on through David, and the love and kindness she had shown him and his mother remained in their hearts forever. If you were in Judith's shoes,